Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Stacy, and I'm a bookseller and the events coordinator at Belmont Books. Belmont Books, for those of you who are not familiar with us, is an independent and locally owned bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that we have a number of virtual events coming up, including PC and Kristen Cast in conversation with Romina Garber tomorrow night, as well as a Pride Month kickoff event in conjunction with Out Metro West, also tomorrow night. You can register for these and our other events on our website, belmontbooks.com, which is also where you can purchase or pre-order all of tonight's books. If you have any questions for the authors, please type them into the Q&A section and we will get to as many questions as we can. We're very excited to welcome Robin, Lara, Tiana, and JC, all graduates of the MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson College. To give you the lay of the land for this event, I will introduce each author before they read. The authors will read for about 10 minutes each, and then we will have time at the end for questions. And Robin is going to go first. Originally from Philadelphia, Robin Rosen Chang has lived in several parts of the US and abroad. Her poetry appears in numerous journals and anthologies. In addition to her MFA, Robin has a master's in city planning and a master's in teaching ESL. She lives in New Jersey, where she teaches college level English as a second language and is a private tutor. And Robin, take it away.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Belmont Books, particularly Kathy Crowley and Stacy for hosting us tonight. I'm reading from my debut poetry collection, The Curator's Notes. And The Curator's Notes engages with loss as well as beauty and love. And it also explores how identity, feminine identity, collective identity, and individual identity are shaped by the stories we inherit. I'm going to start with one of those stories. This poem is called Lore. Besides the eyes, I've always denied any similarity to my mother. But I too worry about birds. The lone egret standing at lake's edge, one leg buckled backwards. For flight, its wings beat only 2 times per second. I saw one preening its white feathers the day my mother died. If I could, I'd ask her, why have a 5th child when you were out of love and had options? I knew I was a mistake. In nature, birds do what is necessary. Most nurture the young, but some won't feed the weak. Others push eggs from the nest. The next 2 poems I'm going to read focus on loss and the loss of the speaker's mother. Futility. I'm here, I say to her, over a metal bar, keeping her in the bed she scarcely occupies. I want to comfort her, rub her rutted back. I can't. I'm here, I repeat, I'm here. Her body burrows into itself, like she's going time traveling back to nothing. Riptide. My mother's arm reaches out of the water and slides back in. Then the other arm. Repeatedly, they appear and disappear as they move her through the turbulent ocean. She's swimming diagonal to the shoreline, almost like someone caught in a riptide. But she's not. She's going calmly of her own volition, retreating from the beach where I lie. I squeeze my shut eyes hard. A sliver of her face appears, a waning moon, when her head turns after every second stroke. Her mouth opens just enough to pull an air that holds life in her. Fixed on something she seems to see, she keeps going. She doesn't struggle. The current doesn't batter her. It doesn't carry her off. She's a white spot in the water. She's taking herself away. The next poem I'm reading goes back in time. It's called Salve. In late fall, my neighbor and I would wrap our small hands around the carrot's stalks and yank until dangling miniature torpedoes, orange burnished brown. We washed the carrots under the outdoor spigot, freezing water needling our skin, earth blood streaming down the roots in rivulets. Eager, we ate what we had grown, and with it the loam, sand, silt, and clay, the same the worms had, and believed we were getting closer, O kingdom of dirt. I am, two more poems left, I believe, or three, sorry. The building referred to in this poem is the Chrysler Building in Manhattan. This poem is called Sublime. Sublime, my husband says, eyeing the Art Deco landmark, its iconic eagle gargoyles and silver spires. I say, it pales compared to cows in clover fields, their round eyes spinning like planets in white sea galaxies. The way they languidly chew for hours, no, entire days, while their calves nurse, yanking teats, heads butting udders as they try to suck every drop. And how the cows seem so perfectly indifferent to the long-horned goats, their brass bells clanging in the valley where glaciers slid through like giant snails smoothing the ground. Such an amazing feat, he adds, concerning the skyscraper. But I know those animals are more urgent than metal raptors and that needle stabbing the sky as if wanting to make it bleed. I once worried such differences would destroy us. This next poem is it's a love poem to my husband. It's called On My Mind. On my mind. Not things that float, moon, jellyfish, dust in sunbeam, skins of ice, skim on warm milk, wafts of cilantro, sound of O inside your mouth. But things that curl, sheep's wool, seahorse tail, double helix strand, three-banded armadillo, toes in mud, your breath on cold nights, and things that pulse, hummingbird wings, banana leaves in monsoon rain, high tide, quasar leaf quasars, echocardiogram of the sun, your hum, and things that intertwine. Beetroots, staves and staffs, cursive X's, our arms and legs, an eternal knot. Sheets at daybreak. And I'm going to finish with this poem, which was written when we lived in Barcelona. You need to know that a chirimoya is a tropical fruit with white flesh and large black seeds. Many things I am not. The road, its ruts and rises disappearing around a corner. I'm not the forest floor. I'm not a pond, not a lily pad floating on a pond, or the silty bottom my feet sink into. Damp leaves along the water's edge are home to a host of small creatures of which I am not one, not a maple leaf. No thing surrounded by points speaks of me. I'm not a speck of red from a pine needle prick. I love the flaky silver layers of mica schist, how they can be peeled away to reveal new layers. In this dream, I'm Mediterranean blue. I'm the chatter of wild parrots. I am chirimoya, its sweet flesh swaddling seeds. When I was born, I was surely swaddled in flannel and cradled in my mother's arms. I glowed like the tint in my glass of vino rojo. I'm sipping it, recalling her gaze. I'm awake, smelling a flower on the orange tree. Thank you.
Okay, that was great, Robin. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Lara. Lara Egger is an Australian native who now lives in Boston, the recipient of a Massachusetts Cultural Council Fellowship, winner of the Arts and Letters Rumi Prize and the Juniper Prize for Poetry, and a two-time Pushcart nominee. Her work has appeared in numerous journals. Lara is the co-owner of Estragon, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, Tapas Bar. And we will turn this over to Lara now.
Thank you, Stacey. And thanks to Kathy also and everyone at Belmont Books for hosting us this evening. And thank you, Robin, for that beautiful introduction to our evening. So I'm going to read a few poems from my book and How to Love Everyone and Almost Get Away with It. Okay. The Igneous Hours. Today, the sun whispered another secret into the deaf dog's ear. Page 6 of the owner's manual states, to prevent oxidization, the human shadow requires 10 minutes of eye contact daily, but mentions nothing of pheromones, and the soul's troubleshooting page is missing. I'm trying to remember where it all went wrong. Maybe the day I learned the Bangles weren't singing about just another man named Monday, or the night I was mistaken for a prostitute and felt for the first time I had a shot at beauty. In Tibetan Sign Language, the word shadow is the same as the sign for imaginary friend. In this country, just last week, a shadow was arrested for stalking. Permission, redemption, as if a sunset knows the difference. But it's true, isn't it? In those igneous hours, anything goes. More than once you must have heard it. The world is your oyster. And the deaf dog laughing, burying the shucking knives with his bones. Okay. This next poem is called SOS. save our souls. Mondays, the heart needs a parachute. Tuesdays, a life jacket. This man's is black and blue. Despite the heartburn, I volunteer to walk through calamity's revolving door. Ask the blind baseball team, the headless orchestra, do you really need all 5 senses? To hear a dog dreaming is to understand the anguish of clouds. To lie to oneself is inevitable. Raise your hand if you're willing to break the bad news to the music box ballerina. In some languages, flamenco is an anagram of arrhythmia. Tachycardia is the sound as the soul hits the floor. An octopus has 3 hearts, but uses none of them. The woman with 3 arms rarely pays for her own drinks. Sometimes the gods mistake our shipwrecks for symphonies. We try to sink the melody, but the melody always swims. Okay. This is called If You're Anything Like Me. If you're anything like me, you've imagined how it feels to have a magician saw you in half. Sorry, these exit seats are already taken. The irises I planted were every audacity of bruise, and still you said they were ravishing. There are healthy ways to enjoy a relationship with pain. Glitter glue, for example. Sometimes I fall in love with the wrong words. Yesterday, I walked around the kitchen saying xylophone, 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 when what I really needed was a particle accelerator good with maps. Nothing changes, then it does. Who's taking minutes? I want to know why my fingerprint looks like dishwater circling a drain. I want to know why angels form a V and not a circle when they fly. If you're anything like me, you've asked yourself, is the future more like a fossil or a carnival claw vending machine? When I talk about pain, I mean these irises, frostbitten overnight. The bridge between us. If there was trouble, we entered willingly. We sharpened the day into glass. Somewhere a bell rang. Somewhere a bird flew its desire into the open mouth of the world. We reached for it, or maybe it fell. What if what lands between 2 people isn't destiny after all, but simply the body mistaking another's orbit for its own? The course of things, no more sacred than the names we give them. You once said the difference between a lightning bug and a firefly could be measured by their weight in the palm of your hand. Close your fist then, tell me how light, when held tightly enough, begins to burn. Okay, I have 2 more poems. I have nothing to say about them, so. Weapons of probable destruction. One must know a member of the organization to receive an invitation. Please explain the rules to me again. 13 is an unlucky number, but I don't know why. There is only one window in the house from which to observe the blush of sunrise, and it's disconcerting to realize, given the magnitude of the event, how many times I've missed it by looking in the wrong direction. NPR reports, the president has ordered men with HIV to rape the women of the families who want to vote against him. I am looking at a reproduction of a Sheila painting, the dark-haired man in the red loincloth, one talon perched across his forehead, the other twisted below his chin. Emaciated. Most days, I would like to be more angular. A realtor on HGTV shows a couple the master bedroom. Someone is sending a message. Last year, I went to Sri Lanka. I spent 10 days on the beach in Tangal, where the air smelled of sea salt and drying fish. From a distance, the ocean looked Marlborough country blue. I used to think ignoring the color of a person's skin was the best way to avoid being racist. This, I discovered, is the same as pretending everyone is white. The difference between black magic and white magic is associative. A black cat is a sign of bad luck. A white lie, not as bad. NPR reports, he is gassing his own people. I don't know who my people are. Do you? By this, I mean, are there others I am under less of an obligation to care about? The residents of Del Rio, Texas have more in common with the citizens of Ciudad Acuña, but they are separated by an international border, a line in the sand. The Dalai Lama advised the monks not to fight back. And then we'll end on a slightly lighter note. Having said that, maybe Starlight is tired of trying to outshine the moon, and the cat deserves an apology for what he's had to see. Maybe every heart needs a pair of sensible shoes. Imagine being an astronaut. Worst case scenario, we'd float on for an infinity together, dead, but forever 33. The problem I've learned with musical chairs is the winner ends up lonely. Good intentions are like painkillers. You only need them when it already hurts. If I seem distracted, it's probably because your cologne reminds me of a blaze of snapdragons on the breath of bloom. Does it still count as betrayal if we just imagine kissing? I have had impure thoughts about angels. I have had impure thoughts about you. Also, I have no idea how electricity works, and I never check my bank statements. Of the 7 deadly sins, lust is the best answer, though sometimes her outfits are inappropriate. Am I being inappropriate? It's not easy being the margarita that gives everyone a hangover. Given their violence, most fairy tales should be rated NC-17. Thanks, guys, for listening.
Thank you so much, Lara. That was great. All right, next up we have Tiana. Tiana Nobile, I apologize, because he said it rhymed with mobile, so of course that's what came out, is a Korean-American adoptee poet. In addition to her MFA, she has an MAT in elementary and special education. Tiana is a Pushcart Prize nominee, a Kundiman Fellow, and a recipient of a Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award. A finalist of the National Poetry Series and Kundiman Poetry Prize, she is the author of the chapbook, The Spirit of the Staircase. Her writing has appeared in numerous publications. Tiana lives in New Orleans, where she works for an arts education nonprofit. And take it away, Tiana.
Hi, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you to Robin for helping make this reading happen, and to Kathy and Belmont Books for hosting us. It's always such a joy to share space with fellow Warren Wilson folks, so thank you all for coming. I'm going to start by reading a long poem that appears in the middle section of my book that just came out called Cleave. Cleave is one of those special words that has opposite meanings. It means both to cut and to cling. Using it as the title for my book was actually inspired by the opening lecture during my first MFA residency that the director of the program, Deborah Albury, gave on this paradoxical word. And after kind of struggling with titles for a few years, I realized I was reminded of this lecture and I realized that this word just perfectly captures what I was trying to explore in my book as a transnational and transracial adoptee. So the middle section of the book deals with instances of international adoption. And I'm going to read the long poem I wrote about the stolen generation, which is the name for a group of Aboriginal children in Australia throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. I thought I'd read this tonight after hearing about the recent mass grave of children that was discovered at the former site of a residential school in Canada, which some of you might have heard of. Residential schools were practiced not only in Canada, but across the world, including in the United States, where Indigenous children were taken from their families and forced to live. And these schools are notorious for their rampant neglect and abuse, and children were often severely punished for speaking their native languages and for practicing native traditions. In many cases, these children were not only taken from their families and forced to attend these schools, but they were also then taken as wards of the state and later given up for adoption in order to be fully assimilated into white society. So like I mentioned, a lot of the book has to do with adoption, and this middle section kind of deals with international instances such as this. So the stolen generation was the name of the group of Aboriginal children who suffered under this practice in Australia. So I'm just going to read the whole poem. It's written in sections, and the second section is an erasure of two pieces of legislation that were passed to legalize this practice of literally kidnapping children from their families, which were ironically called the Aboriginal Protection Acts. The stolen generation. 1. The severing. To pull apart, separated by skin and stalk, to set asunder, taken and scattered like dandelion seeds. To part or open the lips, eyelids, examine with a fine-tooth comb, to slice the skull and measure the brain, to prove what is already known, to cleave a family and watch it unravel, to hinder reunification, to disjoin a body from its color, to disperse its history, its memory, its own recognition of self, to make sense of a loss that severe. 2. The snatching. 1869, 11th November, be it enacted. It shall be lawful from time to time to make orders, to rescind or alter, that is to say, for the place of, for the care, custody, and education of. From time to time, every child living shall be deemed to be within, under, before justice. 1886, 2nd September, whereas the duty to care, to protect. 3. The searching. To make sense of a loss that severe, they searched for each other for 100 years. One mother would hide her daughter in plain sight by blanketing her body with charcoal. They didn't take full bloods, only the ones with hints of European blush in their cheeks. One day they went to the river and forgot the power of water. Charcoal carried off the body in a rippling sweep. They carried her away, skin still gray wet. Another mother brought her infant son to the hospital, sick with a stomach bug. She left him for treatment and 6 months later implored, "I'm writing to ask you if you would let me know how B is and how long before I can have him back home. I have not forgot. I got a baby in there." 4. The cleaving. The word cleave means both to cut and to cling. The child cleaved to her mother. The child cleaved from her mother. The difference a word makes in the forest of our longing. He cleaved to the bed, body damp with dream sweat, eyes sealed so tightly, rivulets of tears streamed from the corners. His mind cleaved to the fading image of a woman's, a mother's tender face. Body buoyant and brown, she was cloven from the river. Mid-stroke, her limbs cleaved like the frayed ends of a rope. How do you begin to reconcile a cleaving? We try to hold each other without touching. Voices scramble. White noise fills our bones. I'll read two more. Abstract. Igneous rocks are formed by fire. Conceived in the belly of a volcano, lava drips down its side and deposits at the base. As a result of cooler temperatures, the magma grows viscous on the Earth's surface and undergoes a process of solidification. Basalt, granite, obsidian. Broken down by weathering and erosion, the rock will become sediment, loose bits of matter, the dregs. Later, these same pieces will accumulate and lithify to form sedimentary rocks, conglomerate, limestone, sandstone. Over time, this same rock will succumb to pressure and sink back down inside the earth to be heated and melted, metamorphosized. Gneiss, marble, quartzite. Once deep enough in the earth's mantle, the metamorphic rock will liquefy and return to the magma chamber. Or will the rock evade erosion, unwilling to be weathered? Will the rock rise up again instead of returning to its magma pillow? Or will the rock crumble into tiny particles of sand and pass its time in a shoal on the bottom of the ocean? My body a stone, weathered, compacted, compressed, softened by another body's tender heat, a hardened face wont to wince. If I jump from a cliff, will the canyon catch me? Or will I tumble, endlessly moving, endlessly seeking a place to rest my head? So I've taught elementary school for the last 12 years. I just finished my 12th year teaching, and a science unit that would come up frequently was the life cycle of rocks. And actually it was doing those lessons with my third graders that inspired that poem. So I'll read one more called Migrant. So growing up in a white family, I never really identified as an immigrant, as an adoptee, but as an adult, I've been able to recognize that although my immigrant story isn't the most typical, I still migrated here from elsewhere. And there is a certain kind of resiliency and solidarity that immigrants share in that journey. So this poem was written to honor that. Migrant. Of an animal, especially a bird, a wandering species whom no seas nor places limit, a seed who survives despite the depths of hard winter, the ripple of a herring steering her band from icy seas to warmer strands. To find the usual watering places, despite the gauze of death that shrouds our eyes, is a breathtaking feat. Do you ever wonder why we felt like happy birds, brushing our feathers on the tips of leaves? How we lifted our toes from one sandbank and landed, fingertips first, on another? Why we clutched the dumb and tiny creatures of flower and blade and sod between our budding fists? From an origin of buried seeds emerge these many-banded dagger wings. We of the sky, the dirt, and the sea, we the 7-league booters and the little by littlers, we transmigrated souls will prevail. We will carry ourselves into the realms of light. Thank you. I wish I could see y'all's faces, but thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Tiana. That was beautiful. Next up, we have JC Todd. JC is the author of The Damages of Mourning, a 2019 Eric Hoffer Award finalist. She's the author of other books and chapbooks and is the winner of the Rita Dove Poetry Prize. JC holds fellowships from a number of organizations and is currently a poet with the Dodge Poetry Program. She has taught at Bryn Mawr College and is in the MFA program at Rosemont. JC lives in Philadelphia. Take it away, JC.
I want to thank Kathy and Stacy at Belmont Books for this opportunity to read, and Robin, Lara, and Tiana for your astonishing and moving readings, and all of you who have come to listen and celebrate their debut books. I'm going to be reading from Beyond Repair, which is now in pre-release, so it's my new or almost new book. These poems explore the effect of war's traumas on women, civilians living in combat zones, combatants, and those like me, and perhaps you, who witness from a distance. Over the scope of the book, the speaker of the first poem grows whole through the act of witness. So I'll begin with that poem. It's called In Whom the Dying Does Not End. Just as her eggs began to cluster along the genital bridge, and the neural groove began to close, its cells churning toward brain. Just as a vacuole opened to become a mouth, and nubs of her limbs budded, Hafez, father of Bashar, ordered the military force of his regime to crush the revolt of the Muslim Brotherhood. It happened in Hama, while I gestated, TV off, newspapers unread in Harrisburg, my thinking sludgy, speech cut back, consumed by what I fed. In February, the month I mostly slept through, a cat curled at each hip and a riot of cells firing between them. From the second day until the 22nd, the troops of Hafez attacked the people that Hafez ruled. 20,000 dead, some say more, in 20 days, while her thousand cells swelled and halved, dividing into human, the only daily news I was aware of. Loved, she grew, singular, anarchic, safe in the province of my body, and Hama was raised. Hama, the mouth opens to begin. Ha, closes. Ma, dampered. Hama, two exhalations drained of oxygen. Hama, they say to say more dishonors the dead, dishonors the living, in whom the dying does not end. Hama, where no one dares to say the names of the dead except in secret. Hama, thousands distilled into smudge, smear, stain on crumbled walls whose shadows the living merged into, hoping to be unseen. What happened in Hama? Not asked as a question, stated to point to what can't be said. The city, rubble and crater, the dust of flesh, of sand and stone, a red, reproaching speech. In 1982, October 6, my speech returned, My breasts reclaimed abuzz with milk. I woke, delivered by her birth into what I'd missed, the world where she would live, its playing fields and killing floors. Tiananmen, Somalia, Cairo, Standing Rock, Gaza, Ferguson, Aleppo, where some will say nothing is left, not even names. So in the midst of war, living in war, what becomes of language? A bed in Al-Rajan. Bedshams scattered, linens tugged from the taut restraint of tucked in corners. The clock ticks, the heart ticks, the bird keeps drilling the tree across the courtyard that we lost in the explosion. Drill, tick, whoosh of blood, the thick perfume of hyacinths heating up, all indivisible from this mangle. But there is no this, just fractions of flesh, a nose and no body, an ear and no body, a tongue and no body. Without a speaker, language, what is it? Not the stories that rise on words, not the image as an illustration, bed, shams, scattered, linens, drilling, bird, hyacinths, fragments. Have they made the bed as Allah makes it? While we are thinking war unmade the bed. And then there are the combatants, women as well as men. And these two poems are from a sonnet sequence whose main character, I guess you can have a character in a poem, whose main figure is a Air Force physician, a female, serving in Iraq. So these get pretty close to her consciousness. New twist. Bombs riddle a market. Heroes meet the wounded, aid shoppers mad to escape, cradle the dying, and detonate. It rains flesh. Faintly sweet, as if burning sugars tinged the air. The heat does it, sizzles juices like lamb on a grate, but it's dog, human, goat, an intimate cross-species slurry or oddly warm sleet that pierces skin. Organic shrapnel, mixing with clay shards, fine grains of cumin, cayenne, bits of plastic, glass, a chaos mosaic or tattoo that her tweezing and stitching will not remove. In dreams, their skin gapes open to wound her, pain that has no analgesic. Too wound up, and there's no analgesic strong enough to bring her down, but uproar. Like an orgy of Texas Hold'em, a 5-shot pour of vodka disguised as IV fluid, skin flick sex, a ruckus of buddy rub, or chick-lit porn, soft kissing, nipples, perking lipward, or her, a rock band star, her voice pure raw. She wants Harim, what's banned by Quranic law, an antidote to this frantic heist of life from slaughter. Why don't the brass forbid the docks to revive a charred and gutted cell? To stop before condemning a life to a mist of pain and meds. She'll revive herself with it, on prowl with Kit Kat ears, black wig, a twitchy tail. Late in the book, the speaker of the first poem begins to speak again, her story, her back home, out of war zone, never in war zone story. Sonogram. Before she left, the tech shot me through with sound that the full and useful bladder bounced onto a screen, echoing internals, image by image. Then she named my organs one by one: uterus, ovaries, liver, adrenals, kidneys, spleen. Abdomen smeared with oil, exposed in the chill of a sanitized room. I wait for the verdict. Urethra's burning. I'm not allowed to pee the 2 quarts of water they had me down an hour ago. Rising like backwash, an image of villagers I read about in 7th grade. Villagers marched, sweating and thirsty, yoked to drums of water, rounded into a rough clearing and force-fed the water they'd carried and called for until their bellies swelled and hardened into gourds. Bursting in me, insurgent memory, walled off for 30 years. Where is the sonogram, CAT scan, MRI to locate rogue cells that refuse to forget? This is where the sorrow lodges, here, where it hurts. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, JC. That was great. I'd like to invite you all to come back on screen if you would like to. And thank you all for such great readings. We do have one question so far, and I continue to encourage people to please type in more questions. This one's from Kathy, and it's for all of you. And she said, love listening to you all read, and congratulations on your books. I'm sure you've been asked this many times, but I would be interested in hearing how the pandemic has affected your poetry and creative processes. Thank you. Anyone can just jump in if they have an answer.
I think since I found out that my book was going to be published right like a month before lockdown. So I think pretty much the whole pandemic has just been putting the book together. I have not written anything in forever. I don't know about y'all.
I began the final revisions for this book right around the time the pandemic was announced in a way that turned me inside and kept me inside. And I was very glad for the lack of distraction. But when I was finished revising, I had a few poems. I spent about a month walking every morning, and I wrote haiku in my head and then wrote it down. And since then, yeah, I have to say I'm pretty much shut down, though I'm reading a lot.
Anybody else want to comment?
I'll just say, I think for me, like Tiana, I found out that the book was going to be published. I don't know, I could be wrong. Never mind. But what I was going to say is that I think for the first few months of lockdown and the pandemic, everything was so new and scary and unknown. That I found it really difficult to sit down and write. The level of anxiety and the level of unknowability made it very hard for me to concentrate. But I think as we sort of entered the summer and things started to seem like there was going to be a light at the end of the tunnel, and I was lucky in some respects that, you know, when the restaurant was closed, I didn't have any work. So I was able then, I think, to, you know, I did a few grind months and started writing. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, I also found out my book was being published during the pandemic. So, and that took a lot of time and energy, but I was also really distracted. I found writing hard. And when I did write, I feel I went a little bit more in the direction of perhaps more eco-poetics and more existential issues. But yeah, it's been very challenging, you know, especially just even being so removed from the world, right? And being more of an observer. It just gives you a different perspective. It takes you out. So it's definitely been very challenging.
Yeah, I'm sure. Do any of you have questions for each other, I wonder? No, that's okay.
Yeah, I do. So JC, I was just curious when you started working on the material you've been engaging with.
Okay, this is a kind of, I think in 2001, this really began. Now, of course, I was in Lithuania and I was staying in an area that had been ghetto too during the German occupation. And so I was learning a lot about life in a ghetto and how art kept people going, but also how people were starving and disappearing. And so it introduced me to war in a way that I had not been introduced before, because I was talking to people who had lived through that. And that got me thinking about war. And then shortly after that, one of my sons joined the first wave of Americans who were sent to Iraq. And then my daughter-in-law went as an Air Force physician. And then my grandson went to Afghanistan. And of course, I'm supporting them, but I'm a pacifist. So I'm learning more and more about war, reading blogs, military blogs, and all sorts of things. And the poems sort of started to come as reflections. And I was talking to a friend of mine, Fadwa, who is Iranian, lives in Philadelphia now. And she was telling me about her family members who over the years have disappeared. And so we were consoling each other. And then that got me interested in understanding what it was to live in the Middle East as a civilian during the war. So it's been a long journey.
Kate has a question for all of you, which is, how did you approach the arrangement of your book? Anybody can jump in.
can go. I think so. My book is in three sections, and I think the manuscript has shifted over the because the skeleton of this book was my thesis, and it's definitely shifted what it's looked like since then. But the second section was always kind of like a more of a standalone. It's kind of the first and third, I feel like, are more kind of autobiographical, and kind of the first kind of is just laying the groundwork, and then I get very more critical, I think, and get closer in the third, and then the second is a kind of a pull away. And in my last semester at Warren Wilson, which I wondered if other folks wanted to talk about just like how that informed the making of the book. But my last semester, I worked with Paula Tremba, and we did a lot of reading books and just talking about how books are sectioned, like how our books are arranged, and why is this section, like, you know, he pointed out a lot, the second section is often an elegy and the third is the erotic, and like why is that such a common arrangement in contemporary poetry. And I think I use that as a way to think about how do I want to break mine down, thinking about like the elegy in terms of like international adoption, and then the third kind of not necessarily erotic, but getting kind of very close and critical. What about you, Robin?
I struggled a lot because I have, and I didn't really read some of the different threads in my book, but I have several different threads. One of which is a series of poems that reimagine the creation story, and these Eve is sort of a foil in which the speaker is able to address certain issues and come to certain insights. So I first struggled with sort of a somewhat narrative progression, and then integrating sort of the more nature poems and the creation poems and trying to mix them up, and it was not working. So I struggled to find a way to kind of have all of these. And I think one thing that really helped was my publisher suggested putting my book into 4 sections, and I had it into 3, and that really relieved the pressure to have like a rising action, a climax, and a falling action. So that is one thing that really helped me immensely. And then we also let go of that whole idea of any linearity. So there are poems, it's just not linear, and I think that's good because my book deals a lot with memory, right? And that's the curatorial part of this. You know, we have memories from experiences, from stories, from artifacts. When you're dealing with memory, it's not necessarily linear at all. So so that was my experience. Lara?
You would think that I would have more to say on this because I actually did for those of you that didn't go to Warren Wilson, in your graduating residency, you have to teach a class, or sometimes you can do it before, but anyway, generally. And I actually taught my class on ordering, ideas for ordering a manuscript. How did I do it? I think different from maybe you, Robin, and also actually maybe Tiana and JC too. You know, my poems tend not to be narrative poems, so I didn't have to worry too much about. I guess I was worried more about an emotional arc or plan as opposed to some kind of narrative landscape. I mean, I think for me, I was looking for what sort of metaphors and what sort of emotional centers in each of the poems were speaking to one another, and not wanting to have them directly juxtaposed with each other, but also not wanting to have them too far apart, lest that resonance be lost. but gosh, there is like so many different ways, right? But I do remember in my class, Van Jordan, who Tiana, I think you worked with, right? He said that his first book, he sent it out a bunch of times and then, and it wasn't getting picked up. And then someone suggested that he reverse the order of the poems. And I don't know, Tiana, you probably know if it was like a direct reversal, but apparently as soon as he did that, the book got picked up, which just shows you ordering is everything. But that's all I have.
I heard that story too. Yeah, it's with I think it was with Magnolia, because he did it in chronological order, and then he flipped it and started with her as an older woman, and went back in time, and it just like blew the book right open.
Mhm. Yeah.
All right. I'm sorry. Go ahead, JC.
That's, yeah, it's odd because I have no confidence about ordering. I never have. And so with this book, I just wanted to lay down the landscape of war or living in war in the Middle East. And many of the poems are set in Syria because that is where I got real-time read accounts that were direct transliterations of refugees. So I felt that had to be forward. We had to see that first. And then we could see the invaders, the American invaders. And then we could see the American soldiers come home and live on the streets and suffer PTSD and so forth. And then the speaker presented herself. And then the war she was born into. There are some stories from that, which really are the first poems I wrote from the ghettos of Lithuania. So it's kind of in part like a history book. I'm ashamed to say that because it's poetry, or I feel conflicted saying that. But I think I kind of had that in mind when I was ordering.
Great. We had another question, but it seems to have disappeared.
Oh, sorry. I typed an answer, and so it's in the answer. It moved to the answered.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Asako says, thank you so much for sharing these poems. If there is time, I'm curious about other poets all of you have been reading and any collections you feel your collections are in conversation with. And I think we will have this be the last question. If you all want to take a turn with it. I see Tiana, you already answered it. I don't know if you want to read it out loud or just let it be.
I can speak to that just really quickly. These are two friends whose books also just came out this spring. Imagine Us, the Swarm by Muriel Leung is really lovely. I think something that we have in common is this idea of imagining or projecting our own like mythic stories, personal mythologies. And Last Days by Tomiko Bayer is a really wonderful new collection. She's like in like kind of like radical eco-poetics and that like challenges of climate change, but then she kind of writes this like speculative revolutionary thing in the middle. It's really, really lovely.
Well, in terms of stories of harm suffered, I think Diane Kerr's book, Perigee, which is about sexual abuse, sexual molestation of a young girl, is kind of in the realm of what, it's a new book. It just won the Brittingham, and it's kind of in the realm of what I've been writing about, which is a kind of witness. And then Paisley Rechtel's, actually, it's her prose work on writing about war has had quite an influence on me.
such a hard question. I mean, I hate to because sometimes I deal with issues related to more domestic setting and family. I mean, it would be, I can't not mention Louise Glick, right, or Sharon Olds, but I think more of my more recent work, I feel influenced by what Brian Tier is doing. I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name correctly. There's an E at the end, and I don't know if it's a silent A. So I would mention them and so many others that I'm probably not thinking of right now. Mostly my current reading has been a lot of people who had debut books out. So, and that's been really super gratifying.
Briefly, I think that is a very, very hard question. Oh, also, I just have to give a quick shout out to Asako, who asked this question. She has an amazing, I guess it's a novel, right, Asako, out right now, The Inheritors. And if you guys haven't read it, you really should, because she's amazing. But anyway, it's so hard because it's like, what people do you perceive your poems to be in conversation with? What people do others perceive your poems to be in conversation with? And then for me, it's often, who do I want my poems to be in conversation with, but just can't really get there. I mean, for me, in this book, I think Dean Young has definitely been an influence. And then I would say the people that I'm reading a lot now, Eduardo Corral, I just love his last two books. I think, I mean, he's something I aspire to, or the way he writes. Diane Zeus's Frank Sonnets. I've been reading Kim Adonicio's new book, Now We're Getting Somewhere. I guess those three. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Great. Well, I have to thank you all so much. This was really a great event, and I'm so glad that you were all able to do it and provide those great answers. And to the people who came to hear it, I know some people have left already, but to those of you who are still here, thank you so much for coming and spending this time with us. And we hope to see you at future events.
Thank you so much. Thanks for hosting us, and thanks for everyone for coming.
Thank you.
And to you guys.
Yeah, thank you
Good
so
night,
much,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Bye.